ніби включений. Можна? Да. Ще раз добрий ранок, шановні учасники.
Good morning, dear participants. Our today's public discussion. Today we are speaking of gender inclusive and gender sensitive recovery of Ukraine after URC Ukraine Recovery Conference 2024. A few words about the format of our today's event, the objective and some technical aspects, followed by the conference. As we work under difficult conditions, and we shall have a small technical break at 12 o'clock because we have electricity blackout, and we shall have 10 to 15 minutes before they switch to the power generator. Over time, we can communicate and ask some additional questions. Also, we expect a coffee break. I hope we can use it. And therefore, we shall make a small unplanned break, which will slightly change our agenda. This is a small technical comment. We work in a hybrid format. We have quite a lot of participants connected on Zoom who will also connect and have an opportunity to speak. Therefore, I kindly request you, if you ask your questions, make your comments, if you intend to speak, please use your microphones. This will help our participants who are on Zoom to hear and to listen to the interpretation, which is also provided Ukrainian English. Therefore, you can use the language which is most convenient. This was a small technical introduction, which is important to all of us so that we can work fruitfully. As we know, today's conference was the third one after Lugano and London. This time it was hosted by Germany in Berlin, where the huge conference took place. And following the outcomes of it, we have today's discussion to have a look. What was the expectation and what did we receive? What can be the next steps? What's important for us to have in mind for the future?
Зробимо ще технічно.
We shall make a small technical break once again because people complain they cannot hear online.
Є вже звук у нас? Немає?
Один, два, три, чотири, п'ять. Як ви мене чуєте? Це Укрінформ.
Не чують, пишуть, що не чули.
А у нас Нікіта, він Zoom бачить.
Я просто... Істеричний шум пишуть. І голосу не чути.
Один, два, три, чотири, п'ять. Це Укрінформ. Як ви нас чуєте? Один, два, три.
1, 2, 3. Чи чути мене в зумі? Дуже погано, да?
Коли є все в житті, буває вперше. Ми тут багато разів проводимо, але такого ще не
Ще раз, це Укрінформ. Як ви нас чуєте в зумі? Підкажіть, будь ласка.
О, чути? А мене чути в зумі? О, супер.
Very good news. They can hear, they can see. Good morning. I'm not sure if you could hear anything before. I will just say a few words. First of all, on Zoom, you can hear interpretation, Ukrainian or English. Please choose the channel most convenient for you. You can ask your questions. Please write on chat. We shall respond, and we shall give to our guests and the speakers. Not to make a further delay, I will give the floor to Kateryna, because we are changing the agenda. We are in the hybrid mode, and we have some turbulence. Kateryna is the government ombudsman for gender equality. She is one of the co-organizers of today's event, and the person who did a lot. That's a matter of gender equality and female leadership is on the agenda on the conference which took place in Berlin. Thank you for this introduction. We passed a long way, and I would like to congratulate you with this achievement, and yet we are still in the beginning of this long way. As gender mainstreaming and the principles of gender equality must be in every sphere of the administration, every level, including the system of international technical assistance. This was discussed since 2020, when the sectoral working group Gender Equality was created, and gender equality was determined as an important principle of the government policy. And this principle was confirmed on the conference in Lugano after the London conference of 2023 in Ukraine. They created the platform of gender mainstreaming and inclusion in order to unite all of the stakeholders, as they say, the government entities, the businesses, members of parliament, the oblast administration, civic organizations, into such work. And to make the consultative panel of civic organizations working. This year, we have another step forward, the International Alliance. which must help us to work more actively with the donor community. Both to have the projects focused on support of the civic organizations and women's organizations, also inclusion of the gender matters into the activities of the government agencies, and also every project of the international technical assistance becomes gender sensitive. And the partnership of the state and the international organizations, development partners, and civil society is very important. Therefore, I request to give the floor to Natalya Karbovska, which can join us online. She has several minutes before the beginning of the new meeting. Natalia, if you can hear us, we kindly request you to join our meeting, and especially I have the question to you as a person who could participate in the previous conference in Lugano, as I remember. And the question is to you, did you hear today the main messages that we expected to hear, and how do you see whether the matter of gender equality, social inclusion, as a
cross-cutting issues.
As a cross-cutting matter of this conference. Thank you very much indeed, dear colleagues. If you can follow me, yes, indeed. I will be very brief because the communication is not very good. I can say that this year, indeed, I have heard two important messages. The first one about the civil society organizations who have been invited to the conference. Also, women's organizations, feminist organizations. And as they were invited, it's a powerful message of the government of Germany, of the government of Ukraine, about the importance of participation and involvement of the civil society organizations with the strategy implementation. Another message which was important to me is also participation of the regions. This year I also saw quite many representatives of different regions of Ukraine. As it looks to me, Natalia is no longer on Zoom. Natalia is back. You could try to switch off the video. Maybe this will improve the communications. I apologize. I suggest that we continue. If Natalia still returns, we shall give her the floor once again. I would like to ask if on Zoom there is Iryna Postolovska, the Deputy Minister for Social Policy. Iryna, you are with us. We can see you. We have a question to you. What was important to you as a representative of the government of Ukraine, as a representative of the Ministry of Social Policy, to be conveyed to the international counterparts of the conference of 2024 because you discussed the impact of the war on the women, female leadership, on girls. What were the key messages of yourselves for the conference? What did you expect? What could you achieve? Good morning once again. Thank you very much for this opportunity and for this important event to discuss the outcomes of the conference on Ukraine's recovery. We have been involved in the organization of this conference for more than 3 months, and indeed it was a fruitful work in order to ensure the highlighting of the problems faced by Ukraine these days, and also to share the outcomes that we could achieve from last year, if we count since the past year, since the previous Ukraine Recovery Conference, and also making the emphasis on the investment into the human capital. As it was noted by Kateryna, indeed this year focused most of the attention on the investment into human capital, capacity building, also taking into account the interests of all groups of the population, and of course gender-sensitive recovery. As a representative of the Ministry of Social Policy, which also led the entire dimension of human capital, it was important for us to convey this gender aspect both in the panel for gender mainstreaming and also the other panels. I would like to note that generally on the conference of Ukraine's recovery this year, we achieved the gender balance concerning the representatives who took part in different panels, and also we did our best to convey those gender-sensitive aspects, the cross-cutting ones, the role of the women in business, the role of the women in the social recovery and providing social services, and also the role of women and girls in the field of education. And also for us, it was quite important. Directly on the panel of gender mainstreaming, it was important for me to remind the world and to discuss the impact of a full-scale invasion of Russian Federation on women and girls who suffer and continue to suffer from the war, and also to remind of the new challenges that we face concerning the economic independence, and also increase the role of women in the services of taking the care of others, because women take the function of taking care of the family members and children where infrastructure is destroyed and children cannot attend the school, and to remind that now when we form the policy, we accept the new challenges, and we also do it with the gender aspects, and also that for the future that our donors would include the gender aspects into their financing and their programs, that we jointly can build the inclusive recovery for everybody in Ukraine. Thank you, Iryna. It was written by Natalya Karbovska that she managed to join. Therefore, shall we try once again? Shall we connect Natalya in order to hear Natalya? Yes, I'm with you. I hope you can hear me well. Simply had some problems with the connection. I will discuss very briefly. Of course, I'm not sure if you heard the answers to the question. I had two messages about participation of civil society organizations and attention to the regions this year. I have witnessed with my own eyes how many people arrived from the regions and the civil society organizations. I believe it was a powerful message, and we need to continue to build on the same foundation which was laid down by the conference in Berlin. In the same manner as we did it after London, and the experience of London demonstrated how important is the work after the conference, and therefore Natalia was disconnected once again, which is a regret, yet we heard your main ideas and we're grateful for that. Then we move forward to the next speakers of our panel discussion. Today we invited the speaker, who is Sabine, who represents a large organization, UN Women in Ukraine. We have a question to you, Sabine, as a representative and a person who leads UN Women in Ukraine, and as you do a lot for strengthening of women's leadership in Ukraine, strengthening gender equality in particular. The question is about your expectations that your organization and you in particular went to this conference, and what was achieved. As you cannot stay with us on the third panel, which results have been achieved?
Part because I have enough to say in the first part, so I'll keep I'll keep some space for the third part. So I'm sorry that I'm still speaking in English, and I hope that you can understand me, or if you don't, that you can take the earphones. First, I just want to say thank you very much for organizing this session, to give us an opportunity to talk a little bit about what happened at the Ukraine Recovery Conference in Berlin. But first, I just want to say that you know, the success of the URC is because of solidarity. And I always talk about how important solidarity is in the women's movement, and I think that what we've seen together over the past year is an incredible cooperation across all advocates and allies of gender equality. So with the government structures, of course, with the Commissioner for Gender Equality Policy, but also with the Ministry of Social Policy, with the Deputy Prime Minister's Office. But we've also seen this solidarity from several members of parliament, from several members of local and regional government, of course with the feminist movement here in Kyiv, but also throughout the regions from different parts of Ukraine. Also with the private sector, and then with our international partners. So really the success that has led to the Recovery Conference is because of this great solidarity and cooperation amongst all of us together. So I just want to say that that's really the key to the success, and because a lot was done over the past year. So that's why I just want to spend a little bit of time, if you allow, just talking about the travel, because it wasn't just by chance that this all happened in Berlin. It was very much a continuation of Lugano and London Ukraine Recovery Conference, but then I think an acceleration of the movement of trying to ensure a gender-responsive recovery, with, of course, the launch of the platform for gender mainstreaming and inclusive recovery, led by the government, but with the support of the other partners. This was a very powerful initiative that came out of the London conference, and where we also have to thank the support, particularly of the UK government, for having supported this at that time. Then, of course, the launch of the CSO Consultative Council, which has played such an important role in guiding all the work on recovery. But what I also want to say is that this has led not only to an advocacy movement, but also to some changes in key policies. So the fact that gender was mainstreamed throughout the Ukraine plan, leading to the Ukraine facility, is super important, because obviously that is going to be where a lot of the support and financing is going to come through the Ukraine facility. So to ensure that there was gender not only in the human dimensions, but also in and other elements of that plan was of key importance. The fact that the Rapid Disaster Needs Assessment run by the World Bank, the European Union, and the UN had a chapter on the needs of women and girls was very important, because this really put this in the limelight in terms of the thinking of development partners, and particularly the World Bank, which is obviously a key investor in the recovery. The fact that we then had the Commission on the Status of Women in New York in March, which had as a key theme financing for gender equality. So that is where member states and donor countries signed on to commit to invest more money on gender equality and women's empowerment, was another key step. And there was a side event also on recovery in Ukraine, which also brought this issue, to the New York perspective, which was very important. I should say another very key part of legislation is the national strategy on local and regional development. So Natalya has brought up the key role and the key work that has been happening at the Hromada and regional level. Well, this new strategy is another key area that will be guiding the recovery planning at the Hromada and Oblast level. And here too, thanks to the support of the Ministry of Infrastructure and Local and Regional government, it was also possible to ensure that this policy has a strong gender dimension and gender is mainstreamed. So really what we're seeing is that there is the legislative basis to ensure that gender is mainstreamed in the recovery. There are the structures in place. There is also the role of the private sector that has stepped up. We also have new companies that have signed on to something called the Women Empowerment Principles, which is very important because obviously the recovery is going to be driven also by the private sector. And finally, also I would say within my UN partners, we have also seen our resident coordinator, Denise Brown, really take to heart this issue of supporting women leadership in the recovery, and also other UN organizations that have been supporting this. So I would say that this has been the kind of whole train that led to Berlin. I should also, of course, say the important role that the German hosts have played. Germany, which has both a feminist development policy and a feminist foreign policy, that has really provided kind of the vision to ensure a strong gender presence on gender equality in the URC. And of course, the fact that we had the visit of the minister of the German Minister for Development, Ms. Schulze, who had a discussion with women leaders. That was also a good step for Berlin. So I just wanted to remind us all of that because I think it points to the different areas of work which will also be needed now in the third part of the discussion today, which means what will be the follow-up points for the URC, because obviously the URC is a good moment in time to kind of see the results, to see women there fully present, women from local communities, women from government, from civil society, from the private sector, all there, to have a special panel on leadership, and then of course to have the launch of the alliance. But this is continual work, and so I'm looking forward to continuing that all with you and to continuing the discussion during the course of this session.
Thank you, Sabine.
Regardless of the fact that we have had this turbulent beginning to our panel discussion, I would like us to get back to the beginning of our agenda and now give the floor to Madam Rachel Keane, who heads the social recovery and inclusion at the UK Embassy in Ukraine. And in the first place, I would also like to thank her and say that it is with the support of the UK government that today's event is taking place. It's a great pleasure for me to pass the floor to Ms. Rachel. I know that Ms. Rachel last year was also present at the conference, and she made a lot of effort, particularly for the organization of the human dimension sector. Therefore, I think that Ms. Rachel has a great deal of experience, basically both practical as well as experience that she has gained here to say about the progress that Ukraine has gained during all of these conferences in the context of social inclusion. So without much further ado, Rachel, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. And if there was ever a reminder after 2.5 years that I should be working on my Ukrainian lessons, I think I have had that this morning. So I imagine what I may say is going to be repetitive of the speakers before me. I think that though will likely signal that we are all very strongly aligned on some of these issues. And I have to be honest, I'm not the world's best diplomat, and I know today is being recorded, but I am going to be as transparent as I can be while keeping my job. And I, want to say I think this year was a phenomenal step forward. I want to congratulate Ukraine. I want to congratulate Germany. I want to congratulate all the women's rights organizations and our partners who have made such an effort. And I'm really actually delighted that every panelist here today we have the privilege of working with. Support to Ukraine's victory and recovery is obviously at the heart of UK foreign policy. You'll hear us say that a lot. You'll hear us say that women, girls, marginalized groups impacted differently, have different priorities, requirements for recovery. And if I'm honest, last year was a challenge. The focus of the conference was mobilizing the private sector for recovery. We worked very hard to try and ensure civil society had a meaningful role, but it was challenging. We managed to get a human capital session. It's why we funded a side event with our partners on gender and inclusive recovery, but it was a side event. We managed to do one more on child protection and care reform, but it's partly why we funded and provided technical support for the Gender and Inclusive Recovery Dialogue Platform with Government of Ukraine and women's rights organizations, because we could see that there was a critical need here that we were really struggling to make traction on. And it wasn't enough, but we wanted progress from Lugano. And I want us to feel like this conference wasn't enough and that we will want program from Berlin, because I think what we really knew mattered is how we leveraged that conference, how we prompted it to progress into kind of bigger and wider discussions about trajectory of gender and inclusion, and also how we used it to leverage our own portfolio to step up. Because as Sabine said, conferences, they're a moment in time. The real work has been long underway by Ukraine since the full-scale invasion began, and it's going to continue. So, we've worked very hard to put social recovery, gender equality, inclusion at the heart of our portfolio between last year and this. And it's been ambitious, and I think for our partners, often exhausting, including our hosts, including, Natalya and others who are here today. But we have seen a tidal change. We have managed to go from a human capital session to launching a flagship new program on social recovery about more inclusive social systems and services. We've managed to, together with our Ministry of Social Policy, the EU, UNICEF, the bank, launch the new Social Recovery Inclusion Partnership to kind of support a rights-based, people-centered recovery that leaves no one behind. And, we hope that will work with the Gender Inclusive Recovery Dialogue Platform, the new Gender Alliance, the new Skills Alliance, so we can really improve our coordination across these really complex and multi-sectoral areas. And, we want to co-create this together. We want to ensure it's participatory, it's localized, it's responsive. And URC galvanized progress last year, from a gender side event to scaling up our Women, Peace and Security program with our women's rights organizations, which has a call open, just saying, for women-led and gender-responsive veterans initiatives right now. We managed to up our support for the UN Women, Peace, Humanitarian Fund, which does brilliant work, for the work of system strengthening with UNFPA, strengthening our work on war crimes and PSVI, working closely with the Gender Commissioner and her fantastic work, expanding our work on inclusive economy and women's entrepreneurship with our GROW program, with our fantastic host today. We managed to expand into more work on disability inclusion and barrier-free, more work on better care. There's so much more to do, but it's just trying to say that these conferences should be the trigger. Now it's the action, and we can't be satisfied with a panel. A panel is more than we had. It is fantastic, but gender is not a homogenous issue to be dealt with in an hour. We can only be satisfied by actually the rights-based inclusive recovery that comes after it, the spectrum from relief to reconstruction to reform. And these events, they are transitory. And if we're honest, they're often quite self-congratulatory, and we can't get complacent. Now is not the time for the international community to think, fantastic, well done, we've done a gender panel, we've launched some alliances, fantastic, great for us. Instead, it's now's the time to step up that coordination, that communication, that collaboration. We galvanize our action now, our collective action to support social recovery, gender responsive, inclusive reform. And so many new initiatives and commitments have emerged, and that is fantastic. But we must invest in a way that's avoiding duplication, in a way that's strengthening national, local systems, services, and actors, because they're the one who will lead recovery in Ukraine. We will all go. I hope I don't. I'm looking for a Ukrainian husband myself, but we will see. We will move on. And it is our Ukrainian counterparts who must be leading this. And we have to be guided by the rights, the voices, the choices that they are showing. You know, we're doing it in partnership with women's rights organizations, in partnerships with OPDs, in partnerships with children and family groups, because that's how you build back better. That is how you change it from words into something meaningful. And the political will is awe-inspiring, right? We are privileged to work with actors like Commissioner Levchenko, like Deputy Minister Postolova, you know, and at this point I'd even call us friends, whether they like it or not. And we are so privileged to work with our phenomenal Ukrainian women-led partners who are leading with courage and conviction and fighting every day for a better future for their families, for their communities, their countries. And if Ukraine can do that and they can look to the future, then we have to be standing shoulder to shoulder. Feminism isn't a women's issue. Inclusion isn't a panel. You know, supporting this supports everyone in society. This is how we build a stronger, prosperous, resilient Ukraine that is underpinned by rights and freedom and diversity. And the UK will continue this support until victory and afterwards. But together, I think we can be more than the sum of our parts. And I think together we can use the progress we have made from this year to next and keep going. And no pressure, Italy, but we are standing with you all. And I want to see more. And I want all of the international community to be standing with Ukraine to achieve that. That's my small request.
Thank you, Rachel. It was quite inspired speech. Ми продовжуємо нашу роботу.
Now we carry on our work. Again, we are having some changes and amendments to our agenda. And joining us now is Ms. Yevgenia Kravchuk, who is an MP of Ukraine. Ms. Yevgenia, the question that I would like to ask you as an MP of Ukraine, I know that a lot of work had been done, a lot of negotiations were conducted to ensure that gender equality issues are included on the agenda as well as women's leadership points. So my question is, were your expectations, did your expectations live up? Did the events of this conference live up to your expectations based on all of the panel discussions, all of the meetings that you were engaged in? What is it that we have to move on with? So the floor is yours, Ms. Yevgenia.
Speaking English and Ukrainian, what is the convenient way? I can do either way.
Як вам зручно?
Залежно яка аудиторія.
Depending on the audience. We have prevalently Ukrainian audience.
French.
У нас забезпечується переклад, тому можете говорити українською.
Interpretation is provided into English, so you can speak Ukrainian. Okay, I will take advantage of this opportunity. First of all, I would like to congratulate you from Strasbourg. I am right now at Strasbourg at the parliamentary session, and behind me you can see an exhibition dedicated to 75 years of the Council of Europe and the active participation of women, their involvement in the work of the Council of Europe. And by the way, on all of the stands, at one of the stands, or one of the photographs of the stands, you can see Ms. Kateryna Levchenko. So we would like to congratulate her on this remarkable achievement. Now, shifting to our topic, discussing the results of the Berlin conference, what we have arrived at and what is to follow. First of all, I suppose that this is a great achievement, a big attainment of the team, that this panel did take place. And it's very, very important. It was important to ensure that this would happen in Berlin. It's wonderful that it did not just happen in Berlin and that we were not closed in our bubble, but as far as I remember, there was very solid presentation of women speakers at all of the platforms. this is a very solid indicative that women's rights is not only interesting to 20 to 40 people who had come to these panels on gender mainstreaming and female rights recovery, and this is already a mainstream. It's a great achievement. Also signing the memoranda, creating this coalition is also a great attainment, because I can see that more and more countries right now can join this coalition. This is not limited only to those who signed this memorandum in Berlin. I would also like to extend my gratitude to our German counterparts who right from the outset determined the topic of gender mainstream, as well as the involvement of women in Ukraine's recovery as being one of the most important things. It seems to me there seems to be a problem. I can hear the translation. We don't seem to have any difficulty. You can go on as you have started. That's why I urge all of our partners and the next host of the next Ukraine Recovery Conference, that is Italy, to make it one of the pillars for the next Ukraine's Recovery Conference, which will be held in Rome next year. And naturally, I assume that we also require a very accessible marketing campaign and elucidation, clarifying all of these notions, because for the most part, when people hear gender mainstreaming, for them, it sounds like a foreign set of words. People don't understand what it is all about. And with very, very simple examples, we have to try and explain to people that it's about the participation of women, their involvement. Because if we just build plants and factories without building places for daycare or nursery, kindergartens, facilities, there will be no possibility for people to go and work. Children have to be taken care of. So these are very simple and plain examples that we have to illustrate our activities with. And then, no matter whether it is at the Ukraine Forum at this conference that we will be speaking about such issues, or in a small village somewhere in Chernihiv region, in the heart of Ukraine, people will still understand what these have to offer as opportunities for us. So right now there will be a Ukrainian exhibition opening up, and tomorrow there will be a Ukrainian day at the conference. I'm also one of the authors, pairing and presenting Ukraine. That's where we are getting ready and promoting women's leadership. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Yevgenia. I very much hope that you will achieve everything that you have planned tomorrow, and every success. Goodbye. Thank you. So we keep going on. And although we keep having changes and amendments to our agenda, I would still like to give the floor to Mr. Markus Kohl, who is a representative of the German side of things, who were responsible for hosting this conference that we have been speaking about so much. He is the head of the cooperation division at the Embassy of the Federal Republic of Germany in Ukraine. So my question to you, Mr. Markus, is to someone who was involved and represents the the German side of things. So what were your expectations as the organizer of this conference? Did you plan that you would achieve the results of integrating gender issues into the discussions, into mainstreaming? Or did you expect even greater involvement of gender issues and equality, equity points in the agenda? You could also speak more about some of the outputs and deliverables of this conference, the things that it managed to achieve.
And for inviting me and organizing this exchange. It's a great opportunity to hear also other voices. Of course, it's not on me to judge the success of the German conference. By the way, first of all, I would like to thank all partners, especially, of course, the Ukrainian government, for our, and in my opinion, very successful mutual organized conference. But as I said, I'm not impartial in this matter. But to answer your questions directly, yes, of course. We very early in the process saw the need for the topic of gender inclusive or gender responsive and inclusive recovery. And therefore, and thanks to UN Women also and Kateryna Levchenko and others, we were early on in discussions how we can actually establish this at the conference. And not only in the form of a panel, I mean this one gender panel, but first of all in a very specific deliverable, and I think we will talk about it later today, so I will not go into the details here, but of course also across the whole conference, making sure that the voices of women and the topic of gender is actually reflected in all the dimensions. And the Ukraine Recovery Conference, we had 4 dimensions. We talked about economic recovery, we talked about the human dimension, we had the EU and reform dimension, and the local dimension. And we more or less managed to have all the panels gender balanced, still room for improvement, well taken. But of course we have something to give to the Italians to work on, right, where they can actually improve and get better. So this was our goal, also not only with a view on women, but also civil society. We wanted to make it as a whole of society conference, very inclusive. And just to bore you with a few numbers, in the end it was 3,400 participants, over 500 participants from civil society, almost 500 participants from civil society, 250 participants from municipalities. So it was a massive conference, and I also think it was not only about the panels and the exchange which officially was taking place in the conference program, but for me one of the game changers in being myself in Berlin was the Recovery Forum. There was an exhibition area on another floor, and it has a meeting area. All the communities and private sector were able to actually showcase some best practices, and this created kind of a space for exchange, which I think was unprecedented comparing to the former URCs. So we hope we could also inspire for the future, and of course it's now on the Ukrainian government to do an equally successful conference with the Italians. And as I gave you a few numbers, I mean, also I could talk about the 110 agreements and the almost 17 billion euros which were put into contracts. Those are for sure significant results, but I think for me here in Germany, and we heard it several times today, you said it, Kateryna, it's just the beginning. Rachel made it very clear, no time for complacency. I really heard that very well. We created a political push from the URC, and as I already said, we created a very specific gender deliverable, but we also created the so-called Skills Alliance, where we want to push for capacity building. We created the SME Alliance, where we want to facilitate more support for small and medium-sized enterprises, and the Coalition for Sustainable Municipalities. And in my personal vision, this is all connected. I mean, we cannot do one without the other. So now the main task, and to try to be a little bit inspiring as Rachel was here, in my vision is that we try to connect those different initiatives and make sure that we have this gender perspective also in the SME Alliance, in the Skills Alliance, that we actually have all those topics brought together, and with a process which has the center of gravity here in Kiev, so that we have all the necessary stakeholder on the ground and be able to create the best outcome for it. And I'm happy to talk later a bit more on the detail on the Gender Alliance. But yeah, to answer your questions, yes, we intentionally did a lot of effort to put it there, and I hope we were successful. Still a long way to go. And yes, it hopefully gives a little bit of a burden to the Italians to keep up to the expectations.
Дякую, пане Маркусе. Сподіваємося дійсно, що наступна конференція.
Thank you very much, Mr. Marcus. We very much hope that the Italian conference next year will get on board all of the recommendations and all of the wishes and regards, and they will manage to achieve even more than you have this year. So now we are getting a move on to the next part of our today's event. Unfortunately, in 3 minutes, we're going to take this forced break due to the power cut. And I would like to apologize to all of the speakers and participants who are supposed to participate in this panel discussion. However, due to the technical aspects which do not depend on us and which regrettably we couldn't think about before, we have to take this break of 15 minutes. They can also turn off the light a bit later. Okay, if that happens, let us move on. If they turn off the light, then we will take a break. So the question is whether Ms. Yevgenia Lukyanchenko is with us online. Are you online with us? I cannot see her, unfortunately. Maybe Ms. Olena Suslova is online. Good morning. Hello. Hello and welcome. Thank you very much for joining us online today. I know that you did participate in this conference as a representative of a public organization, of an NGO. So it's important for us to hear from you how well your expectations coincided with what you managed to see and feel at the conference, the messages that you managed to hear and get across. Will we be able to recover Ukraine, including gender-inclusive and responsive activities? Yes, thank you. Every day infuses us with hope, and this is definitely our approach, but every step of the way needs to be analyzed to make sure that the follow-up steps are more efficient, or, as Marcus Cole said it, to have room for improvement. So I would like to follow up on what Rachel Kin and Marcus Cole in a way also spoke about. Two things: preparation, the conference, and after it. So before the conference, the preparation. Overall, let me say the following. I suppose that the conference this year allowed us a lot of foundations for the optimism and gender optimism in particular, the preparation prior to the conference. Can you hear me yet? Yes, let's keep working. So speaking about the preparation, I would like to pay attention to two things. First, the lack of regular communication. It was pretty sporadic, I would say. And I would like to ensure that next year we have not only solemn meetings, but also a lot of work meetings. It's very, very important. And I think that we also have to do a lot of practical things so that next year looks somewhat different for us. Second, unclear and untransparent selection of the participants for the conference. I came to realize that not only from the collection of the NGOs and CSOs, as well as business organizations, we wrote to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Unfortunately, no response was given to us. I saw what Eleonora Kolcharna has just contributed, and I think that this is also to do with some other organizations. So I would like to ensure that this happens on a more transparent basis. Speaking about the conference and after it, I had been to Lugano conference. I hadn't been to London. And I can tell you that in these 2 years, there have been some major changes taking place, a lot of interesting, meaningful and robust examples. I'm not going to dwell on them. It's very good that gender mainstreaming session took place in the mainstreaming format. It was mainstreamed for the whole conference. But we would also like to get everyone to think what needs to be done to ensure that this approach is also fraught with tangible results for us. A lot of feministic organizations, female organizations participated, so this is highly optimistic. But what lacked for me was the lack of the standard, the recovery forum, which was described as an exhibition here. Speaking about gender issues, it could have been a platform. I don't know what approach was undertaken by the organizers, either a platform that was mentioned here or the Gender Commissioner Office, which has been doing a lot in this respect. So, unfortunately, this stand was lacking sorely, because there we could have focused our practices on specific things that we have achieved. For example, our NGO, which is a consultation center for women, we did an analysis of the state standards, different recovery plans, and we prepared also analysis of different spaces given gender issues. We are also in touch with different communities to help them. And I'm sure that other women's organizations had done a lot of practical things too.
which could also help demonstrating this to us, both for our session, to invite the participants, and also as they move through that area of the exhibition with all of the stands, also to have a look at it. What is also important? I believe that if we speak generally, I would like to quote the participant of the official delegation of the United States. In one of her posts about the conference, she wrote, "Everything is good, and yet there is no master plan for the recovery." I agree to that, and we also have no, it's a gender master plan for recovery. It's a gender master plan of recovery. This is not like give us 100% of kindergartens. Those are the particular projects, how those kindergartens must be proposed to the government to have. There are quite many practical things we need to focus attention at. The master plan are the projects and also investment projects. We must demonstrate what kind of models are there that we require. Those models can be how to lower the pressure of their caretaking work on the women, and how those women can get access to the resources. That due to gender inequality, that access is restricted. I really liked certain things which follow the conference, and yet I believe they are connected to it. Quite often we say that it's necessary to provide the retraining of women. Such a retraining is important in such fields which are attractive. I would like to appreciate the Ministry of Economy. I hope they become a flagship in this activity. From what I have seen, the information about the retraining of women on the creative industries. This is an attractive field. The number of candidates was quoted, the prospects of employment as well. In the end, there is a link to employment centers. I went there, looked very actively. There is no dedicated gender component that would demonstrate that this is for the women. Of course, the women can try everything, and yet retraining for specific areas is absent. I would like to propose to all of us, I hope it happens, maybe with the support of the platform or the alliance, or otherwise quarterly interagency meetings with exchange of particular aspects of the work and coordination. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for not actually having me disconnected. Thank you very much indeed for your constructive and practical advice of what is worthwhile to do now for the next year in order to strengthen and further reinforce the gender-based approach. Yet we have electricity and we can continue. I would like to ask whether Yevgenia Lukyanchenko joined us. As Yevgenia is not with us, at least I cannot see her on the screen. She is not here. Then we shall move forward. And I would like to give the floor for the discussion and the group discussion. We call it the open microphone discussion. In advance, we requested Lilia Kislitsina to speak because Lilia also took part in the conference, and she works a lot for the development of the civic sector and female leadership. Lilia is a president of civic organization SMART, coordinator of the coalition 1325 from Donetsk region. After Lilia, some people are also willing to speak. If we still have electricity, we shall continue. Thank you, Svitlana. Thank you very much indeed. Today is an important day, which goes under the slogan of restoration and recovery, because today I took part in the conference of Donetsk region Reload, where we discussed how important it is for the government and for the community to unite and to develop our plan for restoration and recovery of Donetsk region. It's important today. You know what happened in Pokrovsk yesterday. If today we speak of security and restoration and recovery, it's necessary because this is our day of tomorrow. I would like to thank all of the international institutions, Ukrainian Women's Foundation, that I managed to visit, attend two important events in 2022 in Lugano and in 2024 in Berlin. I'm grateful to our government ombudsman and all civic organizations who work with the notion of gender equality and inclusion, that in Lugano we have built in the principle into the program of recovery and restoration, the principle of gender equality and inclusion. This is very important, because what can we build and how we shall recover, whether we include all those matters and challenges now faced by Ukrainian people. This is our main commitment. It happened that today millions of my compatriots, people from Donetsk, are not at home. It happened that today started their life from scratch. And it happened that today in Ukraine it's very important to recover the human resources. We can do it. We are a strong nation, and this principle of gender equality and inclusion is about the justice and a human-centric approach. I'm pleased that today in the conference we raised the question of the matter of female leadership. I understand that this is important, that women take an active part in creating the policies and decision-making. And we need to return back to this. We need to return back to the meetings with the women of Donetsk. I request Sabine also to support our Congress of the women of Donetsk region. This is important also for our survival and our identity, even in those communities of Ukraine where we are currently living. It's also important for us that in order for us to make such models, that will be understandable at the local level, and those principles of gender equality and inclusion will become part of the program of restoration and recovery, because it looks to me that we have a very important achievement. Today I can see the preparedness of the government and of the community to work together, and this is of great importance. I'm grateful to our coalition of 1325 from Donetsk region. In spite of being today deconcentrated throughout the country of Ukraine and throughout the world, we are still working for the needs of the Donetsk region, including evacuation and humanitarian assistance and psychological support, and the models for restoration and recovery that we are working on. I'm happy that 12 communities of Donetsk region have created the working group, as they know how to do this security audits. I'm happy that 5 communities of Donetsk region have updated their action plans, including the occupied communities, Liman and Sviatogirsk. I'm happy wherever we are, the people of Donetsk take care of Donetsk, including the communities and the government. I'm grateful to the Oblast administration so that we can hear each other. And really, I hope that when the event takes place in Rome, we also come with specific results on the restoration and recovery in Ukraine, whether the Donetsk region is Ukraine, which won and which builds the society of justice, where everybody can be seen and heard. Thank you, Lydia. I really count on it. I hope for that. Everybody in this room and also online, we all hope that this can really happen. We have one question online, then I can give you the floor. Olesa Bondar, Ukrainian Women's Foundation. You raised your hand. Do you have any question or comment? Thank you very much for this opportunity to make my comment. Actually, I would like to continue the thought of my colleague Natalya Karbovska, who joined today's meeting and could not complete her speech. And I believe that she would like to discuss one thing that I also would like to discuss. According to Natalya, the experience of London demonstrated how the activities are important after the conference. Today we heard more than once of the results after London, including creating the platform of gender mainstreaming and inclusion for the restoration and recovery, and also creation of the consultative panel for civic organizations within this platform in order to strengthen the voice of civic organizations. I would like to say that as a result of the discussions on the consultative panel, we have represented on the conference in Berlin. They have introduced 10 steps for gender inclusive recovery of Ukraine. Actually, those were the recommendations developed by the gender advocacy female advocacy organizations, the recommendations for the government and the international partners about what has been taken into account during the processes of the planning of the recovery and also implementation of the recovery, that the processes of planning and implementation are not gender blind, gender ignorant. I would like to add that obviously civic organizations are open to cooperation, which is important. Before me, several speakers have discussed the importance of coordination and interaction, avoiding the overlapping of the activities, prevention of the overlapped activities. I believe that having this in mind before the next conference, obviously we shall have a stronger position, and the results of the next conference will be even more successful. Thank you. Thank you, Alessa. We opened the second part of the discussion. When we discuss the results achieved and the findings that we have from the conference, we move slowly to the second part. We still have electricity and we can continue working. We still have one comment in the room. We shall give the floor. And shall we move to the second part? Could you please also introduce yourself? Good morning, dear participants of the conference. I represent the Roma Women's Foundation, Cherokee, which was established 2003. At that time, it was the only Roma's female organization. I will discuss the results that we can have a better understanding, maybe to present this for the people who are present here, and they know little about our work. With your permission, I will introduce myself. We have a network of Roma mediators and civic organizations. Those are Roma men and women who are working directly in the communities and closely cooperate with local governments. From the first hours of the full-scale invasion of the enemy into the territory of Ukraine, the mediators have helped the Romas with urgent support to open up shelters and to cover the humanitarian needs which are being supported in those shelters. With the support of mediators, we know the needs of women and men locally, and we know of the people who have suffered due to the disability, and also elderly Roma people. We analyze the situation which helps to respond to the needs of the Romas. Those important data must be used during the development of programs of recovery of Ukraine. Last year, we have sent the proposals of Roma's organizations to the Cabinet of Ministers of Ukraine. This year, we already have two important documents: the report of the situation of Roma women in Ukraine and the humanitarian plan for development of the response to the needs of the Roma people in Ukraine. That plan was developed by Roma Humanitarian Alliance, which was established 2023, and we shall propose for cooperation directly with Roma organizations, which can only be provided with good statistics and yet become reliable partners in the recovery of Ukraine. I call you to invite Roma organizations to such meetings because today we heard there were some conclusions made that people were not happy that they have not been invited. I believe that there must be gender equality also of men and women. In order to make the discussions with those who work with Roma directly on the local level, they know what is the situation also during the war and before the war. So we have quite many organizations of this kind. They have a lot of experience, and they would like to be partners of equal value and to be included, also to participate in the recovery of Ukraine. Therefore, our proposal or request from all of our counterparty Roma organizations of both men and women that they can also be involved in such meetings. Thank you very much indeed. And I also would like to thank you for this opportunity. Now we move to the second part, and there will be the opportunity for us to speak and also to ask the questions and also to have a discussion. In the second part, we would like to speak of the results, the outcomes that we have received during the conference of URC of 2024. I would like to give the floor to Kateryna, because in this part I would like to hear your opinion. What are the results that we have actually received after the conference? What was the outcome? And what shall we work with during the year? Thank you for this opportunity. Indeed, we have spoke of the preparation to the conference and also about the conference, which was very good, very well organized. And also during the preparation and during the conference, the matter of women's participation, female leadership was very visible among the speakers of the panel discussions. We were quite close to the gender parity. And this is resolution of one of the problems that we had on the previous conferences, where mostly men have been represented. However, currently we need to move forward. And we believe that one of the main tasks is the development and strengthening of the methodology basis in order to ensure gender mainstreaming in the restoring, in the recovery and gender mainstreaming in the recovery and the inclusion in the recovery, not just the information campaigns, as it was discussed by Yevgenia Kravchuk, in order to have the understanding by everyone how important the things are which are behind the matter of gender mainstreaming. However, also development of the methodology recommendations, the simple ones for the communities and for the sectors, like energy sector, environmental sector, agriculture. We can count them all. We can also count the other sectors. Obviously, they must contain a certain joint parts, and yet also be special, be specific, and also the indicators that will help us to keep track. How do we move forward in order to ensure equal rights and opportunities for men and women? This is a very important work. It must be carried out in cooperation of the government and the international civic organizations. Ukrainian recovery plan was mentioned, which was approved by the government on the 18th of March of this year, which includes also gender-sensitive part, which is human capital. Even for this part, we need more recommendations and instructions and indicators of how to implement this into the real life, how to move forward, that this plan will transform into practical activity. Olena Suslova proposed some procedural things. As a co-chairwoman and coordinator of the platform, coordinated by the Vice Prime Minister for European and Euro-Atlantic integration, Olga Stefanishina, who is today in Brussels, where they opened up negotiations between Ukraine and the EU about Ukraine's EU accession. This platform indeed can be the site for the discussion of the experience which was developed, and also analysis of the plans, and also the analysis of the strategies developed, because quite many communities develop such strategies. And also improvement of the regulatory framework, that the gender component is a mandatory part of such a strategy. Therefore, with the great organizational work which was done for preparation to the conference, we need to move to very in-depth and also great expert activity that will help our leaders of the communities and the regions and the agencies to implement the gender component into their plans.
Thank you, Ms. Kateryna. It's extremely important to make sure that all of these discussions, results, and negotiations achieved during the conference, they need to be made realistic and practical, so that next year we can talk about new challenges and new achievements in this regard. I have a small question whether or not we have Maria Mezentseva in our hall. Yes, she is. Then, if you don't mind, we would once again like to modify our agenda, which has been modified so many times today. But anyway, I'd like to give the floor to Ms. Anzhelika Belova. The outputs, the results that you have gained. What is your vision right now? Has your vision been impacted? What are we going to do as a result? What has been achieved at the conference? Thank you very much. Thank you for being invited, for your advocacy, particularly the advocacy of women's organizations and those who represent vulnerable cohorts and populations, particularly women, the way that they were presented at the URC this year in Berlin. And I think that this was a great victory, that the gender mainstreaming and women leadership and ensuring gender-sensitive and coherent approach to utilizing this approach for the recovery of Ukraine, that this became a reality. And there was such a vast representation of NGOs and CSOs at this conference, as Mr. Marcus spoke about it. More than 500 different NGOs were present. So my point is, this was a really powerful platform, a networking platform, because we had an opportunity not only to articulate our ideas and express our messages. By the way, there were 3 Roma Ukrainian organizations present: ARKA, the Voice of Romni, and Chirichi. 3 Roma organizations featured at this URC. And this year, with the support of the German Council for Roma Participation, we managed to organize a meeting, and we had a lot of discussions. Multiple organizations sent their representatives, and we spoke there about pressing needs of Roma communities in Ukraine, and this was fantastic. And but I still very much hope that next year we will manage to dream big, and we will be able to organize a panel discussion featuring Roma organizations and NGOs, or some kind of a side event focusing just on that. And I would like to thank you very much for being allowed an opportunity to speak. And I focused on several recommendations that we delivered to our partners, several powerful messages formulated on the basis of the previous year's conference. It was a roundtable talk meant for all of the Roma women, organized by UN Women and UN agencies. So we had developed special recommendations for UN agencies, and when speaking about that, I was guided by these recommendations. So this is definitely making investments in women's leaderships. It's something that we spoke about previously in New York. This is highly valuable for local women's organizations, training programs, participating in international conferences like the USC or the Commission on the Status of Women in New York. This is very, very vital for us to make sure that the needs of Roma communities are heard and included in the plans for humanitarian recovery, reconstruction of Ukraine, to make sure that our experience in the field, the experience of grassroots organizations is not only heard, but we get involved in decision-taking. I also spoke about delivering to Roma community organizations the opportunity to implement several-year projects with flexible funding, with capacity building possibilities, because this is highly important for our sustainability, for us to engage independently in different dialogues and expanding the organizations featuring Roma population, and to have an opportunity to advocate for their rights even more. Because I'll be open with you, at the URC this year, I caught myself thinking that what I'm dreaming about is that next year I will go to the next conference as a participant in Rome, hopefully, and something I would like to hear is that at every panel, someone will mention the Roma community of Ukraine. And of course, I would dream to see the Ukrainian Roma leaders speaking, sitting there and speaking panel sessions. It was also important for me to articulate that both our government and our partners, something that was repeatedly mentioned here today, will build their own plans for recovery, any projects, any policies, including the needs of Roma population and other vulnerable population groups, because vital that every program is based on needs of such vulnerable populations. And this can be achieved. And this will enable us to implement gender-sensitive, responsive approach that we keep talking about so much. Also, I spoke about our successes in digitalization. However, no one mentioned the digital gap. In compact camps, in many situations, 3 families have just one telephone, mobile telephones, button telephone. And I was faced with that myself. I remember when we launched the program, a multi-purpose program for housing purposes, and I witnessed this myself, when people from rural communities would come and they didn't have much in terms of mobile telephone opportunities. What about women? What about the people with disabilities that come from these compact settlements? So every time policymakers, when they sit down around a table to discuss, they have to think about who is not involved, and they need to take into account the needs and wants of these people. And for me, it's a vital message to remind all of us today, and something that I reminded the participants at the conference, to ensure the rights of Roma community is ensuring their rights is one of the important criteria for Ukraine's accession to the EU. It's necessary for us to mention it today because the negotiations program has been started today. And I also reminded the participants that Roma people are also citizens of Ukraine, and our soldiers from Roma community are also fighting and dying for Ukraine's independence. We are part of the multicultural, multinational, multi-ethnic society of Ukraine, and we are truly your partners in building a democratic society. So thank you once again. And last but not least, I'd like to mention it's very important to make sure that all of the developments and messages during the URC, something that Ms. Olena Suslova mentioned today, that they need to be reflected in an overall document, specific recommendations that will be taken on board and accounted for the plan of Ukraine's recovery, as well as the messages for the next follow-up conference, and for Italy as the host of that URC, and that the voices of women's leaders have to be heard at every panel, and the number of speakers from Roma communities has to be increased, and the conference, of course, needs to comply with the values of diversity, inclusion, and equality, which means that the Roma community rural women, LGBT women, women with disabilities definitely need to get involved and to participate in other URCs. Lastly, we also had a conversation with Natalya Karbovska. She had organized a meeting with the Minister of Development from Canada, and we had a conversation about the fact that now is the time to submit recommendations for the Ukrainian Recovery Conference next year. Because on the one hand, it seems that there's a lot of time ahead of us, but in fact, it's not so. A lot has been mentioned, and I very much hope that the next URC will be even more diverse and even better. But this year's, of course, was better than the previous ones, and for that we thank you. Thank you. I suppose that this can be in the first place a recommendation, and Ms. Kateryna Levchenko, you can also become a leader in consolidating efforts in the preparation for the follow-up URC. Thank you. We are so many leaders, women leaders here, and it's a great thing indeed. Anzhelika, thanks a lot for this recommendation. This consultative panel of the NGOs and CSOs that we have at this forum, setting up that would definitely be a fantastic practical exercise. I mean, preparing these recommendations and submitting that for the platform's discussion for us to see what can be done next, what can be disseminated as part of recommendation letters, and what can be translated into the language of legislation and different normative acts, because you're right, this is vitally important. Maria Mezentseva, let me see whether she has sent a response to me. I cannot see Ms. Maria. Is Maria Mezentseva with us now? Unfortunately, not yet. Then I would like to give the floor to Ms. Iryna Drobovich, the Ukrainian Women's Congress. I know that you were also involved in this year's conference. The Ukrainian Women's Congress does not only organize large congresses convening a lot of leaders, but you are also very impactful in terms of shaping political agenda. So, Ms. Iryna, what are your visions concerning the results of this conference? What do you see that Ukraine has to get on board as a result of this conference? Thank you very much for the opportunity to be present here and to speak today and to get involved in the discussion. First and foremost, this has been very solid, outstanding progress that we have been able to witness in Berlin as opposed to what we were able to see in Lugano. I very well remember Lugano, based on the results of our conference in London, and one of the summaries was a statement. In Lugano, we vocalized our principles, but in London, we spoke in blocks, because I was both in London and in Lugano, and I witnessed all that. And last year, there was a regard extended to speak in the language of specific projects in Berlin. And I think that this did take place, and it did take place in particular due to the fact that there was this exhibition and an opportunity to see communities, their needs presented, their huge deal of work, as well as the needs of women residing in these communities. So this was a solid chunk of progress achieved. This was unequivocal. Everything that's been said about solidarity really resonated with me. Solidarity between the Ukrainian women's organizations, solidarity between the Ukrainian civil society organizations and the government apparatus, especially on gender issues. So this joint movement enabled us to see these very fine results. Let me also add by saying that another important possibility presented to us in Berlin was networking. From short discussions and talks which take place at such platforms, it takes us on to big projects. And now it will be our task, both for the civil society and all of the rest of the stakeholders involved in the process of gender policy. It'll be for us up to us to monitor the projects that were initiated in Berlin and how those will be taking off, what we will be able to take on to Rome, and perhaps not only to Rome, but to other events and functions taking place between Berlin and Rome. This is critical for us to pay attention to all that, because it's also about fathoming, conceiving, and understanding the female leadership that we are witnessing right now during the full-scale invasion, both at the regional and national levels. And as an advisor to the Ukrainian National Congress, I would like to speak about 3 causes we are ready to contribute to. Cause 1, we will continue to be engaged in the national discussion about the involvement of Ukrainian women leaders, particularly in the processes of recovery. We're not going to stop only at the national discussions, because we are very well and acutely aware of the war as a global shock that can sideline the issues of women's leadership. We cannot afford for that to take place, especially now when so many efforts of so many people are being made to ensure that Ukraine's leadership is noticed, is made conspicuous and translated into action. We will also be holding regional, national women's congresses because it's necessary for us to open up new female leaders from different sectors, from energy all the way to agriculture, to SMEs, to big business. We will continue making discoveries of new names, and in this way, thus, we will perhaps offer new solutions, which will definitely be compliant with the principles proclaimed in Berlin, the principles of equality and equity being promoted by the government. But the new experience is something that we do need, and that's something that we will propose for our shared moving ahead. We are mindful of veterans, of the people with disabilities, because we are a society of veterans. We are mindful of rural women. The alliance, Reskilling Alliance, which was established in Berlin, will be greatly helpful to us to ensure that the women who are highly vulnerable will get their well-deserved roles in this process of recovery and reconstruction. Another point, another cause that we will also contribute to as the Ukrainian Female Congress, Women's Congress, is continuing to explaining to donors, to international partners, about why it's important to involve women in recovery processes in the way that we will be best heard, and Gender and Exclusive Recovery Alliance, which was established in Berlin, will be helpful to us because we are ready to get involved, something that Ms. Kateryna spoke about, the development of the methodology, formulating it all in very plain and simple language, explaining why women have to be involved in recovery processes. And cause 3, we'll continue our advocacy campaigns, particularly at the international level, and these conferences, the one that was took place in Berlin and in a year will hopefully take place in Rome, are significant for us to build female communication and build contacts between Ukraine and other countries. We enjoyed fantastic meetings with the representatives of female organizations in Germany, different foundations from Germany, and in this way we complemented the efforts of the government, augmenting these efforts. We share our story about the war as well as the story about female leadership, thus supporting this shared movement on the way of our European integration. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Iryna. My colleagues are informing me that Ms. Maria Mezentseva is online with us. She is a member of the Parliament of Ukraine, head of the subcommittee on approximation of Ukraine's legislation to the EU legislation of the Committee of the Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine on Ukraine's integration into the EU. So, Ms. Maria, if you are with us, a question to you as to an MP, someone who was very actively involved in the organizational committee, particularly the panel discussion on female leadership. So what do you see are the results that Ukraine has brought back home? Perhaps some new messages that you were able to hear, new opportunities, or something that you think is worth for us focusing our efforts on. What proposals can we move on throughout the upcoming year to ensure that next year's conference is even more powerful in terms of gender-sensitive approach is amplified? So, Ms. Maria, are you with us? Most likely, she's not on Zoom. She's back, dear colleagues. I hope you can hear me. The sound is very poor. The connection is very poor. Hello. We can hear you very poorly. Very feeble, very choppy connection. Now it's getting better. Now we can even see you. Well, if it's better now, let me very quickly make my presentation, and then I will take it on to the Parliamentary Assembly because we are engaged in debates and different salutations here in Strasbourg, because Europe is supportive of Ukraine and all of its aspirations, and particularly in ensuring gender equal recovery and society, especially right now during the war on the way to the accession to the EU. So the Russian Federation is preventing us in many ways, but I would like to take a few minutes of my involvement speaking about the participation of our joint delegation in the URC 24 in Berlin, where we, not only at the parliamentary level, had an opportunity to share our experiences and speak about our legislative projects that we are promoting. Headed by the initiatives presented by Ms. Kateryna Levchenko and other influential figures from Ukraine. So we reported about the plan. And when preparing for this important event, we, together with the Ukrainian Democratic Female Network, had conducted a number of different female conferences, different fora. They engaged women specialists in providing services to IDPs, employment opportunities, and not only for IDPs, but for the whole Ukrainian population. So some economic aspects and the aspects of recovery, because I would say that they are moving hand in hand in the processes of recovery. Also, in multiple aspects, regions were able to demonstrate similar challenges and issues that they are faced with, as well as some unique things which are not observed and testified to in the west of Ukraine, but more in the east of Ukraine. We're speaking about placing people, providing them with jobs. Today, we're also speaking about the fact that every second business, every new business is a female established startup. We speak about how many functions are right now incumbent on women, and we speak about budgeting. We have been doing that since 2015, particularly elections to local councils, when we began to speak about gender-sensitive budgeting. And basically, also our recommendations that our network had prepared in collaboration with different NGOs and public organizations, in particular with the Government Commissioner for Gender Issues. So at the level of projects, we already have different things to do with energy recovery, infrastructural development issues, how to ensure that women have jobs, in particular when women become mothers, and not only that, going beyond that. So a lot of aspects overlapped, resonated. I would like to thank and congratulate and laud all of the line ministries that were able to make these presentations, because they managed to conclude 16 different agreements to millions of euros, and we were also some money was lent to different healthcare projects, housing projects, and there is also a big plan. The connection is very poor, sorry. Another project to 2 million euro for these two areas of work. And I would like to thank Ms. Kateryna and the Ministry of Economy and the Office of the President for sending this powerful delegation to the URC 24 in Berlin. And hopefully at the level of the parliament, we'll be able to implement all of the requirements that those entail. Well, she's probably off the internet. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to hear her intervention till the end. In a few minutes, we are going to hear another intervention. All right. Due to technical difficulties, unfortunately, we are already lagging behind our agenda, but we will definitely allow everyone an opportunity to speak. Now is the time for the open microphone session. So, Ms. Zefira, the floor goes to you. Could you kindly introduce yourself? Thank you. My name is Zola Kondor. I'm a manager for Council of Europe projects, which is to do with different ethnic minorities and Roma issues, and I work within the Council of Europe in Ukraine. It's a great pleasure for me to be here at this event, because in fact, something that I would like to point out are a few recommendations presented by national minorities, Roma communities, as well as other grassroots organizations that we work with. First of all, as a follow-up to the line vocalized by Ms. Olena Suslova, let me speak about the organizations invited to the URC in Berlin this year. In fact, I received a great number, a huge number of telephone calls from different national ethnic minority organizations who said that they had been trying to be included in this list of the participants, but the Ukrainian side unfortunately didn't invite them, but instead would send them off to the German counterparts for them to be included on the list of the invitees. However, if you get to see that list, a great number, 500 NGOs and CSOs that participated in the organization of this event, but how many of these organizations were the representatives of the national minority organizations, even umbrella organizations, which represent national ethnic minority. 3 Roma community organizations, this is very few. Once again, they were included by the German counterparts, not Ukrainian side. LGBT organizations were very poorly presented. And if we speak about vulnerable cohorts of the population, the ones that are supposed to be there to speak loudly about their problems directly with the partners invited to this conference. So I very much hope that next year we will have better representation. Many more vulnerable organizations will be presented. And it was a vast surprise for me, honestly, that there was not a separate panel concerning the interests and needs of the ethnic minorities, because it's a pressing need for Ukraine, which is included in the negotiating framework, which is a prerequisite for Ukraine's accession into the EU. And Ukraine is implementing a very complicated reform concerning changing the legislation to ensure and advocate the rights of ethnic minorities in Ukraine. Therefore, I do hope that next year this will be included in the agenda for the next URC in Rome, and there will be a separate panel dedicated to these issues. And I hope we will be speaking about what has been done to ensure the rights and advocate for the national minorities, Roma community in Ukraine, etc. So a small remark to make. I wouldn't like us to leave from one conference to another here in Ukraine. A lot has been said about that, because it matters what we do in between these conferences, what we can demonstrate at the next conference, some tangible results. Concerning the implementation of the Roma needs, implementing national minority problems. And I would also like to remind you about the national plan of the EU and the Council of Europe, resilience recovery for Ukraine. So within this project, there are more than 20 projects to be implemented with the support of the government of Ukraine, and they also feature national minority, LGBTQ and Roma community needs and wants. 2 weeks ago, we conducted a big forum together with the Vice Prime Minister's office, Olga Stefanishina's office. And the main objective for that forum was to provide a platform to the representatives of government organizations, regional organizations, to ensure their communication with the national community representatives. And at this platform, as a result of this forum, NGOs developed an address that will be posted on the site of the Vice Prime Minister's office and other governmental structures. I would just like to point out a few things mentioned by the representatives of national minorities and Roma community. First, it's the lack of consultations and involving men and women from these communities in the processes for the development of the recovery programs targeting these populations. For them, it means that the governmental authorities have no information concerning the needs of these national minorities in Ukraine. Therefore, they cannot respond properly to that. Point two that they articulated is that the national, regional, and local authorities have to activate their efforts in order to ensure systemic dialogue on the matters of national minorities, especially for the IDPs, in order to respond properly to their needs. And of course, this also relates to pressing needs of the Roma women who have also become IDPs. Lack of the support at the national level for national ethnic minorities and women's organizations in particular when they have become IDPs. In my work, I keep communicating with NGOs and CSOs of national communities in particular who had to leave the temporarily occupied territories. Nowadays, they have to cover their expenses themselves for the costs of their NGOs and CSOs. They have to re-register their own organizations themselves in the places where they have just moved. And it's a great pity that local authorities or the structures responsible for the policy making are not mindful.
Those organizations could receive, could be provided with offices free of charge, because those people are doing everything with their own money. If you take Melitopol, which was left by more than 20 civic organizations, they have lost everything. And only today only the Council of Europe is actively supporting them in what they do. And of course, they have discussed the importance, the role of women's leadership from amongst the national minorities and Romas and different initiatives in the field of public life. And they recommend the political parties in schools who train the women as future leaders or elected officials to focus on the women from amongst the national minorities and to work with them on a continuous basis, and also with political parties. They also open their doors also for the women from amongst the national minorities, ethnic minorities. Also, there is another thing I would like to discuss during all those consultations and the meetings and the work that we carry out with the civic organizations. They refer to the international organizations as well as the government agencies and the embassies with a request that the participation of women and men from among the national minorities and the Romas shall be provided in the equal and transparent manner, because they believe, they speak of the inclusivity, the inclusive participation, and they speak of the forcing of the artificial leadership. This is what they can observe today. This is a great question, and quite a lot of civic organizations or people who have led the organizations are not in Ukraine anymore. And in some oblasts, the government agencies and oblast administrations have nobody to work with. And we were addressed with such a question that we helped to develop some new approaches of how they can work with such communities. And the very last thing, the document which I discussed before, a joint statement of civic organizations, has quite a lot of proposals and recommendations, and yet it is also an important message that the Council of Europe has supported the preparation of a special report of the Ombudsman for Human Rights about the situation of national minorities in Ukraine, and also the status of national minorities on the temporarily occupied territories. It's a unique report which was heard already in the Parliamentary Committee for Human Rights. It was recommended to be heard also on the plenary session of the Parliament, and the Council of Europe will make the presentation of this report along with the Office of the Ombudsman. This report has 74 recommendations, and of course the Office of the Ombudsman will keep track of the implementation of such recommendations. Also, I would like to add that the Office of the Council of Europe in Ukraine coordinates the Roma International Group, which includes a group of international organizations, also intergovernmental organizations, and we continuously have meetings to exchange information and to support each other. Therefore, if you are interested, if those are the embassies and intergovernmental organizations, we invite everyone, and also we support very important research, because quite many people have spoke of the statistics of the lack of information in Ukraine. These days there are quite a lot of research in the field of national or ethnic minorities as well as Roma. Dear colleagues who are on Zoom, we shall give you the floor in the third part. We can see your hands, and yet we need to move forward because we are behind our schedule. We have the third part, which is also very important when we speak about the key practical decisions. So what we move forward with, and what are the actions of Ukraine in the nearest future, what support do we require, and what are the instruments. Here I would like to give the floor to Rachel King. I believe that Rachel, with her practical experience, has both recommendations and also the vision of how and what decisions are necessary for us that we move forward. Rachel, if you are still with us. She was expected to be with us. Probably she is not.
Так, please, Rachel. Yes, you're welcome.
Any turn?
Yeah, please.
Sorry, I have a message. Unstable network connection, which I don't think is encouraging. I don't think I have the vision here. I think, Ukraine has vision. I think there is so much vision in this room. The government of Ukraine and the women's rights organizations, the OPDs, all the representative groups have shown. I think it's our duty to be supporting that vision. And I think there are one or two things that I do want to put out. I think firstly, can you review the translation? I have a very strange echo. Yes, no.
Перекладу нема?
Присутнє ехо. 1, 2, 3.
Okay, I'll keep going and just hope that. Firstly, I completely support the brilliantly articulated Ukrainian Women Congress plea for an intersectional inclusive recovery that leaves no one behind. We need to be gender transformative, disability inclusive, age sensitive, ethnically diverse, multicultural. These are not at the expense of each other. These enrich each other. I really want to bring across how much our work needs to be evidence-based and research-driven. Together, we've got to build that more complete and transparent evidence-based, robust gender-responsive methodologies. Just as the Commissioner said, one that's informed by experience. This is how we understand the challenges women and marginalized groups face in wartime. This is how we meet their requirements in recovery. This is how we inform more context-specific, accessible, evidence-based decision-making across all our work. And the UK wants to step up. So we're expanding work on peace and security because we know equality underpins peace and security. We're expanding work with our partners here on women's entrepreneurship with our GROW program, Inclusive Economy Project, because we know their empowerment underpins prosperity and sustainable economic recovery. We're expanding work for the most marginalized groups, particularly vulnerable children and families, persons with disabilities, older persons, because enabling accessible environments underpin more cohesive, inclusive societies, as well as human capital development. And we're expanding work on building, Ukraine's inclusive integrated social systems with Spirit, with our new social recovery partnership, because we know investing in people, the systems they need, underpins Ukraine's future and its Euro-Atlantic trajectory. But I think we want to do this collectively. We want to work together to do that, amplifying of voice and rights and choice and visibility. And we want to help that ambition where Ukraine can have a future where their inclusive gender transformative best practice is a model to all of us, because we can learn from Ukraine. And we've come so far over the past year, but we can go so much further. And I keep driving home coordination and collaboration, because that keeps me up at night. With more engagement, comes the risk of more duplication, more siloed work. But instead, we can be more engagement, more alignment, more investment, more opportunity to think beyond our own projects towards our strategic and collective impact. And as Sabine said, and as Iryna said, solidarity, it means we're one movement. And we just need to move from those words to action to make Rome the best URC yet. And then my goal, I think, is a gender and inclusive recovery conference with every thematic session, but step by step. And, I'm glad we're doing it together. When I'm back in Kyiv, I think everyone knows I'm always tragically excited to support everybody's work on this, and I'm always available. But I do think, this is how we move from the moment to the movement. I quite like that. But that is how we do that. This is how we move from each of these moments in time to really supporting something much bigger. And I think we should be proud of how far we've come, but we should be stepping up our support for Ukraine in how far we have to go.
Дякую, Рейчел.
Thank you, Rachel. As this is the final panel discussion on which Marcus promised to discuss in more detail the outcomes. Therefore, I would like to give the floor to Mr. Marcus, because we would like to hear from your part what key decisions and achievements would you see that it's worthwhile for us to know, or that we need to take care about for the coming year, that we can implement the matter of gender equality more actively in the process of recovery.
So we launched this Gender Alliance, and again, thank you to UN Women, to Kateryna, to the Ministry of Social Policy, who really...
To Prime Minister on European integration.
And yes, sorry. Which actually made this thing happen, and it was a great moment in Berlin when we also had the big picture and launched this alliance, which basically builds on the 3 R's. So it's about every member of this alliance commits to either provide more resources, supports women representation, increase women representation, and focus on women's rights and needs. At least one of them, or all of them, or part of them, which is a commitment we already collected from everyone. So we now push for not losing the momentum on this alliance. Therefore, already on Thursday, we have a big meeting with all the members of the alliance to have a very practical discussion, how to institutionalize this, how to make sure it's really moving forward, it's happening a lot. One big excuse from my side already, it will be English only, so we are not living up to the expectation of inclusivity entirely, but it was a balance to find between do we do it early or do we do it later, and we wanted to do it as early as possible, so therefore already my apologies that it's only in English. In the future we will make sure there's of course also translation, but this was now a matter of timing. But yeah, we will decide how to move forward. As I already said, our ideas mainly are to have the center of gravity in Kiev, to have a process here, anchoring it in the sectoral working group on gender, having a very close collaboration with the platform on gender responsive and inclusive recovery, and of course with the civil society consultative panel. This is really one of the things which are utmost important for us, not creating totally new structures, but building on the existing structures and elevating their meaning, helping everyone to use this political commitment from Berlin to increase the attention to the topic, but also to hopefully make the discussion more meaningful. So of course then after Thursday, when we all hopefully agree on a way forward, it's a no-brainer that we need an assessment. I think it was already said today, making sure we have a clear picture of where we all stand, what are the commitments, which will be then important, of course, when we want to measure results in the end, right? So, as I said, we want to elevate then the discussions in the sectoral working group on gender, but also, of course, create the linkages to all the other dialogues we have on all the other topics, because gender is not a topic just in a silo. It's a topic which has to be brought to every single other discussion we have, because women play a role everywhere. And therefore, this will be one of the key added values, in my opinion at least, that we will fertilize this discussion in also the topic of sustainable economic development, in the sphere of skills development, capacity building, but even if it comes probably, and this is not my topic apparently, but if it comes to security and defense, I think women has to be represented everywhere. And demining, absolutely, I totally agree. Yes, no, absolutely. And then of course, the goal has to be to have a report which hopefully shows progress within this year, thanks to this alliance, so that we also have something to actually hand over to the Italians and make sure they pick it up and continue it the same way. And yeah, I mean, of course, Germany will stay a supporter. It doesn't mean we just drop it on the Italians. I just mean we need to convince, of course, the Italians, and it was mentioned several times, to take the topic as serious as we did in Berlin, or even more serious. But just, and then of course we are not only focusing on the process in Ukraine, so the idea is also to have an overarching international process connected to it, so that the topic will be also internationally more on the agenda. We haven't decided yet on specific events, but you can think about, for example, the annual meeting of the World Bank, for example, or the United Nations General Assembly, or at least the CSW, having kind of side events where we actually feature the work of the alliance and having an international process accompanying what is happening on the ground here, and hopefully helping us to keep this momentum, keep the spirit, and then move forward with a lot of energy into the Italian URC. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcus. Пані Сабін, вам теж хочу передати слово.
I would like to give the floor to Sabine. What is your vision, how in the coming future, and what in particular it's necessary to do in order to make use of the results of the conference and to make gender-sensitive recovery?
I think that we're already starting to see a common way forward as well. So I'm not going to repeat any of the things that Marcus already said. I think he covered very well the kind of institutional framework of how to follow up on the commitments and the developments that we saw at the URC. And he also mentioned some of the events that are on the calendar that are going to happen in the coming 6 months or so, that are good places to, again, keep pushing the momentum forward on gender responsive recovery. Maybe the two things that I can add to this is, it's come up, Kateryna, I think, mentioned it, Olena mentioned it as well, the issue of methodology and the tools on how to now make some of these issues more concrete. First, I'd like to say that, of course, Ukraine has already very strong methodological recommendations that were developed before 2022 on, for example, gender-responsive budgeting, on gender-responsive planning, on planning also at the local and regional level that is gender-responsive. So I think in some ways it's about refreshing these tools and recreating awareness about these tools, particularly at the local and regional level. So in my discussions with local and regional authorities, I often ask them, you know, are you applying gender-responsive budgeting? And more times than not, the answer is, what is gender responsive budgeting? So even though there's been a huge amount of training and capacity building on these tools that happened in the past, we clearly see that this needs to be rejuvenated, so that we need to make sure that there is strong awareness about these kind of tools. Similarly, tools that exist to mark contributions. So, for example, the OECD DAC gender marker, the gender markers which the UN uses. This also has to be increased knowledge of how to use these tools, so we're able to actually calculate what kind of progress we make from today until the next URC. Of course, another thing which perhaps the Commissioner will talk about is the linkages with the 1325 National Action Plan and the plans to now monitor, do another round of monitoring of the action plan and preparations for the new 1325 National Action Plan to start in 2025. So obviously there's a very close link between that work and the work on recovery. Recovery is part of the Women, Peace and Security agenda. So here also, I think this will give us a framework to look again, not only at the National Action Plan, but also at the local and regional action plans. And of course, what we're already seeing in the local communities is that many of the women activists who have been mobilized around 1325 are now also mobilized around recovery. So there's a great potential at that level as well. Finally, the one more thing I wanted to mention is that and again, I think this was brought up also by the Deputy Minister for Social Policy, Ms. Postolovska, the whole issue of having also some concrete projects to be proposed. So this, I think, is the ambition for the next RDNA 4, so the next recovery, the next disaster needs assessment of the World Bank, where it would be good that this time we can actually propose projects. We can say, okay, if we need to have more kindergartens, for example, for women to be able to go to work, how much money is that going to cost? How many kindergartens do we actually need? What is the budgeting for that those kindergartens going to be? If we need more reskilling for women so that they can move into different types of jobs that were previously taken up by men, how much is that going to actually cost to have those kind of courses and programs and institutions that are in place to ensure that women can get into that reskilling? So here I would say that that's perhaps an ambition, I think, for all of us, is to really pinpoint what some of these big projects would be and to cost them, so that we really know how much this is going to require, not only from the national budget, but particularly also from the funding that's coming from the international community. So I will leave it at that. Sorry, one other thing, which I won't go into right now, but of course, just a reminder that we have Beijing Plus 30 next year. So this is also a big opportunity for Ukraine to show the rest of the world, all the other countries that are working on the Beijing Plus 30 national reports and then the global forum next at the next CSW. It's also a way for Ukraine to really show to the rest of the world all the progress that has already occurred here, which I really think is remarkable, and that Ukraine will be a model state in terms of gender responsive recovery. Thanks.
Kateryna Борисівна, для вас, да, як?
Ну, ті завдання.
This floor is yours, Kateryna. Those tasks that were discussed by Marcos and Sabina, important tasks also for the government and the civic organizations. I will not repeat, because indeed those things are very important, and our work on the international level, as you may know, it helps us to restore and to counter the gender-based violence related to the conflict and other painful and hot topics for Ukraine. At the level of government and parliament, we shall complete our work on updating the law on ensuring the equal rights of men and women, which will also speak of the recovery, because any activity is based on the laws and the legal norms. And also we shall continue developing the legislation for implementation of Istanbul Convention. All of the provisions of Istanbul Convention because freedom from violence is an important precondition for the active political and economic participation. And here our partners of the government, are also the members of parliament who also support government initiatives, and they introduce a lot of projects of their own, and also civic organizations and international counterparts. We shall both create the new national plan of actions of 1325 and also regional plans, and also develop coalitions of 1325 that exist in 19 regions of Ukraine, but will also be created in all of them, including the Autonomous Republic of Crimea. And this work is an important direction of the activity for the civic organizations. And it will be coordinated by Ukraine's Women Center. No doubt we need to develop the new operational plan for the strategy of ensuring equal rights and opportunities of men and women. And this document, I would like to remind you, we have developed this document as a response to the request. Also, our development counterparts and the ministries who said, well, we would like to implement gender equality, but we don't know how. And then in the year 2020, we began the work on such a strategy, which was approved in the year 2022. The information campaigns and the training, formation of skills, refresher training, professional development. I've been of those people who must understand how and which gender instruments to be used. Thank you. Thank you, Kateryna.
Now we are on to the part which is all about the open microphone discussions, and I would like to invite Luba Maximovich with regard to how long you proceed, just up to 5 minutes. I know that you always have very specific and tangible proposals to submit, but I will be grateful to you if you can just do it in 3 minutes, 5 minutes at most. And then we'll move on to other people who have raised their hands. Yes, a lot has been said today. I'll try not to repeat others. For me, it was extremely important to feel the atmosphere of this USC conference, because as for me, it was highly constructive, rather inspirational in terms of establishing the alliance. It was a huge step forward compared to what had been established in Lugano. In London, I wasn't able to be, but was just in Lugano. So nowadays, what matters, as our colleague Ms. Rachel said, our women, the Ukrainian women, are leaders. So Ukrainian women leaders have to be supported, especially at the level of NGOs and CSOs, because a lot of changes are being implemented at their level. However, I'm also addressing the International Fund to extend their help to the Ukrainian community organizations, because a lot of initiative groups, a lot of new community organizations are being established at that level. So they need to be provided with greater resource in terms of programming, organizing efforts, so that they can also make initiatives at the grassroots levels. So as for me, this is also about involving a greater number of the representatives of the general public for the development of different recommendations. Perhaps we need to get back to the so-called public discussions and hearings, because the wider we get to know about the needs of our beneficiaries from the wider circles of population, the more robust our decisions will be. And let me also draw your attention to the reskilling issues. Developing further skills. This is also a highly acute thing. The situation has been exacerbated in Ukraine when women have to take up the so-called traditionally male jobs. So we need to make sure that female payment and remuneration is in no way lower than it is right now offered to men. On the contrary, It needs to be ensured that women are remunerated better than they are right now. So, of course, due to the alliance, we will be able to develop further plans of actions and monitor, adjust, and see what things can be adjusted and changed, because every region is different, community are different. So here, human-centric approach needs to be at the foreground. This approach needs to be based on human rights in the first place. That's why I would like to thank profusely all of the participants of today's event. Don't want to repeat anything what's been said. But once again, next is the tangible actions to follow, and this can only be done together. And of course, hearing the voices of all of the vulnerable, marginalized populations, new categories of people that also need to be heard. And only then can we change Ukraine and make it dignified and much better than it was before the war. We have every single possibility to ensure that, because we are being supported by the whole global community and we are heard. And of course, I want to make sure that the voices of women are heard better, not only at the local and national, but also at the international level. Thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed, Ms. Luba. We are fully supportive of everything that you have been said, and we hope that we can make it a reality. We have a few raised hands. Dear colleagues, make sure that you limit yourselves to 1 or 2 minutes. First is Yulia Dzyuba. If I have said your name correctly. Thank you. I'll be speaking briefly. My name is Yulia Dzyuba. I'm a representative of Women Democracy Network. We are a huge Ukrainian union. We were presented in the Berlin. At the Berlin conference, 4 of our members were represented, and they were presented 4 different dimensions because it was necessary to represent the women and their interests in Ukraine at different dimensions. We had prepared the so-called resolution document and focused attention on these 4 core dimensions, which require gender-oriented approach, which is about implementing gender approaches at the community, business levels, housing, and social infrastructural sectors. Respectively, we submitted these recommendations to our peers, to the prime ministers of Latvia and Estonia. And on days 2 and 3 in particular, I would like to speak about that. There was a small platform, Gender Mainstreaming and Women Leadership, it was titled. And unfortunately, we only had 25 minutes for that, but our key partners from the World Bank and UN had their interventions and presentations. These resolutions enabled us to communicate very quickly, and I very much hope that next year there will be a platform for the voices to be raised in favor of the public NGOs and CSOs, because this year mostly the governments and official representatives of local levels, they were speaking for the most part. But I think that the voices, especially expert voices of local organizations, will definitely amplify the participation, and we will be very much grateful if you engage with us. We are thankful for being invited to this function. It's a great enthusiasm that I'm filled with in order to create new products and to represent the public sector in a more qualitative way, particularly when we speak about the roles that women have to play in the recovery in Ukraine. So if you invite us next year, we will be very, very grateful for that. So we have very positive feedbacks based on the results of the USC Berlin 24. Thank you, Ludmila. Now we have another participant raising her hand. You're welcome to speak. Good afternoon. My name is Eleonora Kolcha. I'm the director of a charity fund called Blago. We are based in Uzhhorod, the west of Ukraine, but we work across the full border of Ukraine. I have a request to make and a question to ask. The previous speaker spoke about 3 conferences in 3 different locations of Ukraine, which is very good. That there are different events organized speaking about gender equality issues, but the question is whether any Roma organizations had been invited to participate in them. I didn't hear about that. to strengthen gender equality and to build the capacity of Roma women, one needs to invite more Roma organizations, especially women's organizations, involving them in the plans for gender-responsive plans, both at national and international levels. Thank you very much. I'm grateful for this opportunity to be here with you today. Thanks a lot for being so brief. Thank you as a moderator. Iryna has also raised her hand. Please pass the microphone to her, and then the mic will come to you. And at that, we will wrap up because we are lagging behind the schedule. I'll also be speaking in a nutshell. In fact, the recovery is already taking place. And the National Recovery Agency on Reconstruction and Development is in full swing. So it's necessary for us not only to have the plan, gender-sensitive plan, but we also included in the structures which are responsible for using the funds for recovery purposes, and it's vitally important to ensure female organizations, feminist organizations, particularly in different kinds of boards that counteract corruption. And I think that it's worth raising these issues because men are always focusing where resources are. We can speak a lot about gender-sensitive and responsive recovery. However, we need to be where this money is being divvied up, where these resources are divided. So we need to make sure that these processes take place on a transparent and honest basis. And we as women have to be included in these boards. Thank you. Also, would you kindly limit yourself to 1 minute? Because we will also have a coffee break and we will have some additional networking opportunities. Thank you. My name is Valentina Zolotarenko. I'm a representative of Charity, International Charity Fund. I'm a Roma leader, which has been working in the Roma movement since the 1990s, ever since the beginning of Ukraine's independence. We have always been working along these lines of Roma policy making. We also have certain experience and developments that we are ready to share. We have our own indicators, different kinds of questionnaires, things that will come in handy in the future work and follow-up development. We would also like to participate actively in all of these processes. Unfortunately, we were not invited to the previous meetings. That's why we are asking you to invite us. We will definitely actively participate. As Natalya Karbovska has said, it's necessary to make sure that gender-responsive recovery is spoken about not only in different rooms like this one, but in other environments and communities where it heavily depends on these issues to be implemented at different platforms. It needs to be articulated, and the people that we depend on in one way or another have to hear us. We need to get these messages across to them. Recovery also needs to contribute to everyone's good, and no member of society needs to be left behind. So we need to diminish this inequality. Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. One more raised hand I can see, and once again, in a nutshell, because we want to make sure that everyone gets heard. But this will be the last speaker of today. Good afternoon. I'm very happy to be physically present here. Oksana Potapova. I'm a researcher of gender issues in wars and recovery, representative of the Ukrainian Feminist Network. My comment is, I don't know whether you will have time to answer it, but multiple topics raised today, in particular today, they refer to services which are rendered to different vulnerable societies, veterans, IDPs, and it refers to those that render these services. We spoke about NGOs and CSOs involved in that. So I would like to make my remark about the importance of engaging women's feminist organizations in the discussions about the role of the governmental sector, in particular about the payroll, the role of the social care workers, medical service deliverers, and particularly if those are women, the way that this is taking place in Ukraine right now, because caregiving, caretaking is predominantly being taken care of by communities or NGOs and CSOs. And in the context of the recovery and reconstruction, one wants to speak about whether we, as feminist analysts and activists, be impactful on issues of macroeconomy and be agents and be on a par with the other specialists who are engaged in these discussions, because all of these matters implement our conditions of work as well as access to all of these services, in particular for these vulnerable people that all of us get to work with. Within the framework of the conference, I didn't get to hear that, but there were a lot of very important parallel events which featured the academics, scholars, and there are different studies, in particular those done in the Balkans, as a model that was oriented at service rendition, making sure that they could be also delivered by businesses and private sector, and how that helped women in their role of caregivers. So I would like us to learn from the mistakes committed and made by international community in other contexts. So I'm ready to share different links to policy briefs, different studies, and get involved in this discussion should there be interest in this regard expressed. I hope very much that everyone has had an opportunity to express themselves. Everyone has taken an opportunity to participate in today's dialogue. And on behalf of the organizers, I would like to thank the Good Governance Fund for supporting today's event. Also to thank our speakers, men and women joining us today, both online and offline. Ms. Kateryna, perhaps you could say a few final remarks for us to wrap up, and then let us move on to taking some tea and coffee. Dear colleagues, men and women, thank you very much indeed for today's discussion. It's a very important event. We had to communicate this information to the general public about what happened within the framework of preparing for the USC 2024, during the conference itself, the plans discussed, because it's necessary to be informed about all that. Now, one thing matters. The preparation for the conference was highly complicated. However, the work to implement the things planned is really more voluminous. Therefore, I wish all of you strength, cooperation, consolidation. And I also want to thank profusely our dear partners for this cooperation that we have been engaged in before. Glory to Ukraine, glory to her heroes. Thank you. Thank you ever so much for participating today. And enjoy the tea and coffee.
Чай, кава у нас з перервою. Фото, якщо вже спішать, можемо зробити фото. Колеги, є пропозиція зробити спільне фото, якщо підтримують.